Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight we're discussing 1985's The Return of the Living Dead. Alien screenwriter Dan O'Bannon makes his directing debut with this wildly exuberant black comedy that mixes terrific comic performances with good old-fashioned flesh-chomping. With a nod to undead kingpin George A. Romero, courtesy of a story credit from Night of the Living Dead co-writer John Rousseau, medical warehouse worker James Karen reveals to protege Tom Matthews that Night of the Living Dead was actually based on a true story stemming from a reanimating chemical, trioxin 2,4,5. And wouldn't you know it, there just happens to be one caster left downstairs. Before you can say, "Don't touch that," corpses are rising from their graves, licking their moldering lips, and unlike the lumbering shamblers of old, these zombies move with a purpose. Understanding the rhythms of both comedy and horror, writer-director O'Bannon nimbly balances his fast, fury, and funny scenes with well-chosen breathers amid the mayhem. Don Calfa is a laugh riot as curmudgeonly mortician Ernie, and Clu Gulager is marvelous as Bert, Unita's bewildered warehouse boss. As a member of the gang of party-hardy 80s punk rockers, B-movie queen Linnea Quigley became every horror geek's dream date with her nubile in-the-buff graveyard gyrations. The zombies themselves are savage and savagely funny, braying for brains with gusto while our unlikely heroes scramble for their lives. With great gory makeup effects, hilarious slapstick energy, a head-banging soundtrack, and a balls-to-the-wall climax, The Return of the Living Dead became an instant genre fave, spawning numerous sequels of varying quality and a generation of brains-loving fans. Send more podcast guests. We're going to be talking about The Return of the Living Dead from 1985, celebrating its 40th anniversary, and we have an incredible panel to chat about with me. Let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Eric Anderson.
Hello.
Aaron Aubuchon.
Ready to party.
The illustrious Tim Pallas.
How's it going, everyone?
And rounding out our circle, Kristy Jett.
I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to do this podcast.
And we're going to be chatting about The Return of the Living Dead from 1985, celebrating its 40th anniversary, and we'll also touch upon its slew of sequels. Return of the Living Dead Part 2 from 1988, Return of the Living Dead 3 from 1993, and a pair from 2005, Return of the Living Dead Necropolis and Return of the Living Dead Rave to the Grave. And we'll be chatting spoilers all night long, so prepare yourselves, everybody. Thanks for coming on the show, and welcome. What a year 1985 was, right? We had Day of the Dead, we had Fright Night, we had Reanimator, we had this movie. It was quite the slew of awesomeness. Kristy, do you remember where you were and how you came to Return of the Living Dead for the first time?
I was jokingly going to say, I was 4 years old when it came out. I think I saw it was either 88 or 89. I was 7 years old. I had a sister who was 10 years older than me. She had her boyfriend over. She put me in our back den, shut the door, and said, "You can't come out till this movie's over." And I think that's one of the reasons why Tarman kind of ruined my life. As a child, I didn't scare easy. I still don't scare easy, but the big vacant eyes of Tarman in the voice. When I met Alan Troutman in real life, he apologized when I told him he ruined my childhood.
Nice. Let's bounce over to Tim. How'd you come to this one for the first time?
I was very young. My parents had it recorded on a Betamax tape, I think with Hell Night. So I watched it a lot. I want to say I was at least in school, so 5 or 6. But yeah, I'd watch it all the time. And my mom would really only cover my eyes during the graveyard dance scene. I was allowed to watch the rest of it, and I loved it. And I remember we'd go to the video store, and like I'd see the cover art, and I'd be like, "Can we rent this?" And like, "We have this at home," I'm like, "But not this cover." So yeah, it's just always been with me.
Eric, how about you?
Yeah, I first saw this movie about 20 years ago. Had a friend who was obsessed with all things zombie, and she mentioned this one, and I was like, "Oh, one that's deliberately funny. That sounds cool." Checked it out and had a great time.
And Aaron, I know you lobbied hard to be on this one, so I'm excited to hear your origin story with Return of the Living Dead.
Well, as you're well aware, AC, I'm terrible at this question usually.
I know. I was like, wait, what? You actually remember when you saw a movie? That's exciting.
I mean, movies that are very important to me, I often don't know. It's any indication of the level of importance this movie has in my life. This movie world premiered on cable TV on HBO on Halloween night of 1986. And I was there and I recorded it. And I didn't know at the time that I was undergoing the experience that would be the most literally the single most transformative hour and a half of my entire life.
Keep going. Do tell.
Well, this is a movie that taught me. I went to film school eventually. I teach film now. This is really kind of where it began because it taught me eventually. It took a while. It taught me about the critical importance of tone and the critical importance of things that I hadn't paid attention to before this movie. But more than anything else, I just started watching it literally every day. I didn't know why. Part of it was the soundtrack. This is the movie that, I was at a really interesting crossroads. I was 13 years old when the movie came out, and some of my friends had become skateboarders, and I was already kind of flirting with I don't like this classic rock thing that I've been doing up to this point, and that punk rock thing looks pretty cool. And this is the movie that introduced me, that was you're going to become a punk rocker and you're going to go into this world, and this world of this sort of anti-authoritarian world that the movie encompasses and lives in. That thing that has felt to you kind of squared about the entire universe, where adults say things and they're wrong. This movie crystallized. And so I've seen this movie around 200 times. I literally watched it every day for the first couple of years I was in high school. I can't say that there's been a more important film in my life. Frankenstein, this movie, and then there's everything else. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of movies. It's literally what I built my life on. And this one stands at the top of that mountain.
It's funny because this is one that I actually avoided for a long time because I heard it was a comedy. And I was like, I don't know if I want a comedy. I want an actual zombie movie. And it wasn't until I was starting to quote research and become an actual, good horror fan in the 2000s that I'm like, okay, fine. I guess I'll go ahead and sit down in front of this movie called Return of the Living Dead and at least check the box. To what you were just saying, Aaron, it is the perfect alchemy of comedy and horror. It doesn't skimp on either of them. It delivers both in such an extremely effective way. And the fact that this was Dan O'Bannon's directing debut, that's kind of remarkable. And if you listen to the commentary track, he just nothing but bitch about the fact that he didn't have enough money, didn't have enough time, didn't have enough resources, and he still made this incredible movie.
I would challenge anyone to take a look at the plot of this film and tell me an objectively darker story than the one this tells, and then find a single person who walks out of the experience of seeing this film for the first time who hasn't just had so much fun. And I find that a fascinating polarity.
Well, and I think it is. You can tell that it's a low budget movie, but it's still really well done. 40 years later, we've seen a number of zombie comedies. This one just manages to thread the needle in a really interesting way.
It's funny because you say it definitely comes across as a low budget movie. Interestingly enough, I've never looked at it that way. It actually feels like it is a bigger budget film, especially when it comes to effects. Okay, now not all of them, don't get me wrong, but the ones that really hit, obviously Tarman, to some extent, even the guy from the Icebox, but the half zombie too that Tony Gardner did, just amazing. That's all.
The comedy comes more from just the characters themselves. You get to know these characters and, it's kind of just their quirks instead of, here's a joke that we're trying to shove into this horror movie. It's very organic. So I don't really, there's obviously very funny parts, but I don't consider it to be a comedy at all. It's more of a horror movie, and it scared the shit out of me as a kid. So what more can you ask for in a horror movie? Love the characters, and I think that's where it all derives from more than any kind of attempt to make this a comedy film.
Eric, you said you sought this one out because it was a zombie movie that was deliberately funny.
Yes.
Had you seen Shaun of the Dead prior to that?
I think so, yeah. But I think that was probably the only other funny zombie movie I had seen at that point. I was very amused, especially the dialogue at the beginning between the warehouse owner and the crematorium guy. Rabid
Bert and
weasels.
Bert and
Ernie.
Ernie?
Yeah. Then I guess I do feel like it does get more horrific as the movie goes on. And I mean, obviously there's still some jokes in there, but it seems like the focus kind of shifts away from it.
Yeah, I mean, all you need to do is watch Return of the Living Dead Part 2 and realize what a difference there is between people trying to be funny and people just being in the moment and reacting in a heightened way and saying things that feel appropriate without necessarily looking for a laugh.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to interject, I'd like to mention that you do not have to watch Return of the Living Dead Part 2.
If you're looking for a good example, I think is what I was saying.
You know, I don't know that I ever thought of it, especially as a horror comedy, because I didn't really think in those terms at the time. It just hit every note that I wanted it to hit. And like I said, you know, it's this movie where the adults always make things worse. The authorities always make things worse. Every time they engage with a higher level, you know, you see these kids doing all the things that you're told in traditional films, that these are the things that make you a bad person and make you die. They're in graveyards. They're clearly broke. They're listening to music you're not supposed to listen to. They're even engaging in, they're getting naked and dancing around and sort of having sort of pre-sexual relations with each other. All the stuff that horror says, all the stuff that society says you're not supposed to do. And yet in every case, these people are the bravest, most moral people in the movie. And everybody else at every level is a little bit more cowardly and a little bit more stupid and makes things exponentially worse at each level. Every decision that they make makes everything worse. And so for me, it balanced not just horror and comedy, it balanced my worldview perfectly at that moment, you know, whenever I saw it. And it still succeeds for me. I don't have a note about the first one. Perfect movie from start to finish in my mind.
Let's go ahead and talk about kind of our employees, and then we'll talk about our punks. Frank and Freddie, those are our two warehouse workers who are working the shift on July 3rd, 1984. James Karen, who many people will recognize from Poltergeist. He's the one that Craig T. Nelson is shaking and saying, you only move the headstones. He's delivering the high end of the hysteria, and just so funny, because he does such a wonderful arc throughout that. He starts off very droll and ends up, you know, screeching, and actually has like probably the most tear-jerking moment in the movie, you know, as he comes to an end.
First, James and Karen are the name of my parents, so it's pretty cool. But he's great in the movie. I watched the work print of the movie for the first time. You know, there's no music or anything, and you know, it really just showed how good the acting was, especially that opening 10 minutes, and just the way he's playing with it, and you know, getting wide-eyed telling his story, and he's getting wound up. It's just great to watch. I love it.
I'm only going to name drop twice this entire podcast, I promise. So
Good luck.
I ended up through Fright Rags, who I used to work for, I ended up befriending Dan O'Bannon, his widow. And when I was working on the Popcorn Blu-ray out in LA, she let me stay with her for a week, right? So I got to look at this insane collection of all of Dan's things. Like, I got to see his Jodorowsky's Dune book, you know, the one there's only 4 in the world of. I got to touch it. One of my prized like moments, though, she let me hold his shooting script from Return of the Living Dead. He leather bound it, and there were like all these notes in the margins. And out of respect to her, I didn't, because I wanted to take a couple of pictures because it was so cool. And I was like, I'm not going to ask her. It's amazing she's letting me touch this thing. But one of the funnier stories, because I mean, we were just talking about everybody. She was telling me stories about James Karen and Gulager. And one of the funnier ones she told me. And then, of course, when I was IMDbing it, I was like, well, IMDb says it, so I know this is right. Diane was correct. But in the script, when he's retelling the story, he says 1966. When in reality, we know Night of the Living Dead happened in 1968. But then in the film, he says 1969. And she had told me Dan thought it would be great because it makes him seem like a really unreliable narrator. And that's why he's like, no, I'm just going to keep it exactly the way it is. If you didn't have James Cameron, Clue, and Rennie Kaltenbrunner, but the three of them,
Don Calfa.
they add
Don
such
Calfa.
authenticity to this film. I don't think the film would land the way it did without, I don't know, without them. I don't think it would be what it is.
Traditionally, dialogue scenes where you're cutting back and forth between two singles of two actors, you want to get through those as fast as you can, right? They're delivering plot usually, and they're not usually very good. And I think one of the great sort of back and forth two single dialogue sequences in film history is right here, and most of it's because of James Cameron. I mean, his performance is so weird. The corpses, all this weird shit that he does is perfect, and it elevates the mood of all of that storytelling that's going on. I mean, that really is, because people say like, oh, Scream is so self-aware and it was the first of its kind to do that. And I argue all the time, The Return of the Living Dead was just as self-aware as the Scream movies would be. It's just that they discovered that the text was unreliable. I hit the fucking brain. And from that point on, the original text is unreliable. But in that sequence, James Cameron is delivering sort of in the real world. And he does it in such a magnificent way that it's functionally watchable. Like, it's not just plot, it's fun. And I don't know what this movie would be without James Cameron. Tom Matthews is quite good in it. And I remember I talked to him at a convention, and he said that he credits a lot of his own performance to just trying to keep up with James Cameron.
Dan O'Bannon's decision as screenwriter to deviate from the lore that had been established. We know how you deal with zombies. And for him to give us zombies that are completely different than any zombies we've seen before, what a ballsy move on his part.
Originally, Tobe Hooper was supposed to be making this film. He ended up leaving to do Lifeforce. Dan said, I'll do it, John Russo, but I want to completely rewrite everything. I mean, this film exists as it is because of Dan. He made it what it is. In 85, right, you've got Day of the Dead, which, is George striking out and making his Dead film, and then John Russo doing his Living Dead. I just love that they came out the same year. Just all of that. I get very goosey excited to talk about it.
There was a split between George Romero and John Russo because both of them were credited as co-screenwriters for Night of the Living Dead. They parted ways because they had different ideas as to how they wanted the series to play out. George got to use the word dead, and Russo got to use Living Dead. Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, and then we have Return of the Living Dead. And Russo had written a novel and a screenplay, and there Aaron has it right there. The story as we know it has nothing to do with Russo's source material. Like Dan O'Bannon decided he was going to take it in a completely different direction. And I've read that he actually was writing to Tobe Hooper's strengths, and then Hooper left to do Lifeforce. And so Dan O'Bannon was left with the script that he had, basically tooled for Tobe Hooper. He says that he would have changed things even more had he known that he was going to be directing himself from the get-go. I love the fact that this one just basically takes the zombie rules, lays them out for you, and then proceeds to break them over and over and over again.
Dan O'Bannon stated he didn't want to do Romero zombies. He didn't want to tread on that. He wanted to create something new. He also didn't think shambling zombies were very scary. I think he said, if you can't get away from the mummy, you deserve to die. Something like that. The original script by Russo was written in 72, I think, and he couldn't get that shopped around, and then he released it in novel form, and then that was eventually bought out. Eventually Dan O'Bannon got it, kind of overhauled everything. John Russo, I think, said Dawn of the Dead gets to be the true sequel, and he gets the Living Dead name, but it can't be a true sequel. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of the reason they had to rewrite those rules too. A lot of it, I think they were just kind of doing on the fly. And it's crazy that I grew up with this film, and it's so different than any other film, and yet I've never had issue with it.
Yeah, we get all cranky when people mess with our zombie lore. And yet this one does nothing but mess with our zombie lore, and we love it for it.
Destroying the brain does not stop the zombies. Yeah, it definitely gives, I think, both the characters and the audience an oh shit moment.
Right.
Were these not the first zombies that spoke like coherently?
I mean, you would have had
Yeah,
like
I mean,
the voodoo zombies of the 30s and 40s were speaking, but that's a different kind of zombie.
Well, and you really can't kill them. I mean, that's the other thing is that they just, and I thought about that, like when they have the hordes like chasing at the paramedics and at the cops, there's nothing you can do. Like these zombies are terrifying because there's no way to win.
Which again goes back to the point that I made before, which is like this is a tremendously dark movie. From the moment that they pin the pickaxe through its brain, you find out there's nothing, you know, and then it just keeps developing. And of course, the big piece of lore that this invents that I think people forget sometimes because it's so ingrained now. It's like zombies go like this, and then they eat your brains. Well, that's here, you know. That's the eating of the brains comes from here as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
For me at the time, it was so great because I was a nascent horror fan. I was just becoming a really big horror fan. I'd gotten my first issues of Fangoria that same year that I saw this. And it was like, this is a film that's aware that horror movies exist. And while I love what Day of the Dead does to continue on that cycle, I love that this movie says all that stuff that happened in Night of the Living Dead is based on reality. It's aware that Night of the Living Dead exists. And so it's aware that horror exists, and it's not hiding from horror. It's this really intensely horrific movie that recognizes that there's a genre as well. And for me, that was a revelation. Not only does it introduce this brain eating thing, but it also and not being able to kill them and the tone, but it also introduces this idea, at least in my mind, not just that there are monsters in this world, but that there are monster movies, and they're the ones we're familiar with. It lives in the same world as we do.
Well, I would say it lives in the same world as like Fright Night, right? Because Fright Night talks about vampires and how you kill them in the movies. It acknowledges that, yeah, there are monsters and there are monster movies and there are rules. And then it proceeds to do things with them that you're like, wait, you can't do that. But they do it with such courage and conviction. And I love the fact that we have that caveat that James Caron lays out for us in the real world, right? Yeah, you can't play by the movie rules because that's not the real world. This is the real world.
Transmission is different too. They don't seem to come back to life from getting bit. It seems to just be from the gas or from the rain.
So the fact that it's raining the entire movie, that's how our paramedics and cops get changed as well?
Yeah.
And that's what makes the ending so dark. Whenever they go 5,000 dead, but the rains are taking care of the fires.
Not so much.
Right. The threat of spreading it seems more minimal than a regular zombie movie, since transmission's only because of the 2,4,5 trioxin.
However, each one of them is worse than a Terminator. So I always look at the end as being apocalyptic. I think that the end announces the apocalypse.
I think another thing that kind of calls back to and comments on movie lore is we have, like you said, Aaron, we have the kids and the adults. You know, this is the Blob all over again. All of which I want to just kind of lead us back to our pack of punks who really provide a lot of the entertainment in addition to what Clu Gulager, James Caron, and Tom Matthews are providing. Can anybody name check all of our punks?
Guz, Trash, Casey, Suicide. Who am I missing? Chuck.
Spider. I think that's it.
One thing I love about the punks in this movie is they remind me of like what punks look like in small towns. Because like if you like, you know, New York or Los Angeles in the 80s or whatever, you could have like cliques of punks that all kind of look the same. But I love how like the Louisville punk scene, like one of them has a mohawk and another one is like clearly a new wave kid. And another one's kind of just like, I'm just a preppy girl who has like, you know, Tears for Fears record or whatever it is, you know, like it's got a little bit of everybody, you know.
The kind of leader guy is my favorite, especially when he tells Linnea Quigley to have some respect for the dead.
No, I just think he has one of the most iconic lines, and I'm paraphrasing, so I might get it wrong. But he's like, "You think this is a costume? This is a way of life."
I don't know how many of my notebooks I wrote that on in high school.
think I'm going to go with Linnea Quigley as Trash. Is the most memorable for me. Suicide is great, though. I didn't know until gearing up for this that the actor passed away shortly after to leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty sad to hear. Yeah, I think those two are my favorites. Spider's pretty awesome once he gets in the mix with the older guys, though.
Let's talk about Linnea quickly, because certainly I think she made a huge impression on, and I'm so glad that she ended up playing the part, because I know Jewel Shepard was somebody that Dan O'Bannon had approached about playing Trash, and she was an adult dancer, and she was not keen to be naked on film, and so Linnea quickly got the gig, and has turned her into a cult icon.
Let's do that. I just love the way she said that.
I think that Trash has one of the most interesting character arcs in the film, because she is so confident and she is so absolutely grown up in so many ways, and she's so willing to do something that I think would make a lot of other people pretty nervous. And yet by the end, because she's taken off her clothes, she's manufactured this vulnerability for herself where she's constantly trying to get dressed again. And she's almost like a little kid by the time she gets consumed. She's like, come on, guys, hold on, guy. She's like, she turns into almost a little girl. And she goes through this tremendous arc, I feel like, more than almost any of the rest of the characters do. It's an eclipsing performance that she gives to herself, because she does this thing that is the thing that people remember her for. And the big lore around the film is, concentrated a lot on her pubic region. But I think her performance here is just fantastic. I think besides the fact that it's probably one of her most iconic roles, it's also one of her best performances, I think.
Dan O'Bannon knew how to use her in exactly the right way.
So another thing that I noticed, and I think it's because I'm from a small town in Missouri, but when not only the punk rockers are sort of like braver, but when it's a young punk rock black kid who tells the white guy that he's a coward, and then forges this almost grown-up relationship with this older white man. I don't know what it was, but I wanted to be Spider. Like a white kid from Missouri, I was like, that's my guy. That's the guy that I want to be. And I don't know if the race really kind of factored into it for me, but as I got older, I was like, that's really ballsy to have in 1985 sort of the young black punk rock kid standing up to the white business owner guy.
Well, I think that's kind of baked into Dan O'Bannon. Like, his whole view of authority is, pretty cynical. Alien is all about the corporate folks will sell you out. The older folks will sell you, your friends will sell you out. Unless you're part of this group, right? The punks, they will not sell each other out. And they do go back for each other, and they do fight for one another. I also like to talk about Bert and Ernie, played by Clu Gulager and Don Calfa. It's funny, we have two comedy teams. We have James Karen and Tom Matthews. Then we have Clu Gulager and Don Calfa. And then we have the comedy team that is the punks, because everybody has really funny things to say throughout, really hilarious interactions. But I love the scene, the one between Bert and Ernie, where he's introducing the idea of, can you do me a favor? And Don Calfa being basically a Nazi.
One of the weirder, never really touched on in the film details, but they're just like, yeah, Ernie's a Nazi, weirdly.
Why not?
I love the gun he's carrying, but also when they move him over after he gets grabbed by the arm, and he's like cutting off the leg. Isn't it a picture of Adolf and Ava on the pegboard back there?
It's a really strange relationship. You were talking about that moment whenever they bring over the quote unquote rabid weasels. And again, that goes back to like, why on earth did they decide to do that? It's a piece of off-camera business that I think is one of the most fun little bits of conjecture to do, where it's like, because all you see is Clu step into the camera and go, give me that bone saw. And then the next thing you know, we're bringing over these bags of quote unquote rabid weasels. And I love to play the game of let's pretend that we're having that conversation. What was that conversation like? Right. And what are we going to tell him? Well,
tell him we got rabid weasels. Got it. That's great. Nobody has a better idea. Okay, good.
But again, it goes back to how so often they make the wrong decision. And for me, it was like, And it's just to protect his stupid business. And I don't even know how that protects his stupid business, you know? And so at the time it was just, I don't know, it was just such a revelation to me to see them like making the right decisions for their capital and making the wrong decisions for humanity. And I'll say really quickly, one of the funnier collectibles I have is this guy right here, which is the Rabid Weasel action figures. It's just a little,
just a plastic bag.
Yeah, it's just like the little plastic bag with a hand in it.
Who has gotten to meet members of the cast and crew? Kristy, you've talked about your experience. Aaron, how about you?
I got to go to a convention in Louisville about 10 years ago, and a bunch of them were there. It's right here. Tom Matthews, Miguel, Linnea, Beverly. Those are the ones that I met. There was one more person in there, but she was mean to me. But the rest of them were very lovely. I think Jewel had had a few drinks that evening. But what had happened was I got there a little late, and they were doing group photos in this room. And I guess they thought, not enough people showed up because they had taken it all down like 20 minutes before they were supposed to. And I showed up late. I'd driven from St. Louis to Louisville after work, and they pushed me into the room, and they're like, all right, we got to set the camera back up. So can you just stand here and talk to these people for a while? So for the 10, 15 minutes that it took for them to set the camera back up, the cast literally just got in a circle with me and we just chatted. And it was one of the coolest experience, like one of the unluckiest experiences for them. And before it was all over, they drifted away as they were putting the camera together. But for whatever reason, then Linnea hung out with me. She found out that I was a teacher at a film school, and she was like, "Do you want to hear about the film I'm doing?" And I was like, "I so do." And they were just wonderful. They were just really, really, really great. All of them. Like I said, Jewel was not involved in that. She was in the room, but I literally think that she had some drinks that night and was just kind of floating around. But all the rest of them were absolutely lovely. And Beverly Randolph, who, you come away from the movie like, well, she's going to be stuck up preppy. She was the nicest one of the bunch. She was super, super fun, super outstanding.
I've only met Linnea Quigley a few times at some of the movie screenings here in Chicago. So I do have my original DVD signed by her.
I have had the pleasure of meeting everybody with the exception, obviously, of Dan. And also James Karen and Don Calfa. With the exception of that, I've met everybody. And, for a good 8 years, I was writing consistently. I was working on Blu-rays. One of the great, I hesitate to call it a friendship, because in reality, we would email, we would see each other in person. But Tom Matthews, we joke, he jokes, he's my biggest fan and I'm his. That's what he says. And this is not a Return of the Living Dead story, but this is one of the little Tom things that I found really interesting. So Tom was a working actor. He had a friend whose name was George Clooney. George said, I'm thinking of coming out to LA. And Tom's like, why don't you come stay in my place? And essentially George Clooney lived in his closet. That's where he was staying. And a few years ago, there was this story about how George Clooney decided his 10 best friends he's giving $1 million tax-free to. Tom was one of those friends.
Wow, that's cool.
I did a panel actually with Clue and his son John at Texas Frightmare. It was the one panel I was petrified to do. I was like, dear God, I can't believe I'm meeting him. It ended up being one of the best panels I've ever done. He was the sweetest man in the universe. At the end, he gave me a hug and just telling me, oh, you're really great at what you do, honey. You got to come to LA. It like cracked me up. I have not had a bad experience with anybody. William Stout, I met through Fright Rags. He's such a brilliant man, but I'll talk about that when we talk about Tarman and stuff. And then I'll talk about how great Alan Troutman is when we talk about Tarman too.
That is a great opportunity, though, to talk about Clu Gulager, because I think he's kind of a hero of this one.
I think it's especially impressive that he was like the last cast member added. A lot of them had a week to rehearse before shooting started. So that helped a lot with their delivery and everything. But yeah, Clu came on late. I think Dan O'Bannon was saying that that's who he was worried about. Clu just put on that uniform and was like kind of looking around the office, and he just became exactly like how he wanted him to be. And so cool.
I've heard that, Clu could be a little cantankerous on set. I think he's mellowed as time has gone on, but apparently like he was the one that Dan was slightly afraid of.
Clu says he didn't do anything. He's a professional, damn it.
I mean, Bert is the film's father in a lot of ways. You know, he stands in as this father figure. And again, he's trying to do the right things at various times. He's trying to protect his business. He's trying to do the right stuff. And Clue, again, I can't fathom anybody in any of these roles, but he nailed the part of that. He never seems like he's anything other than confident, and yet he confidently makes the wrong decision every time, And it's a perfect chemistry, because if he had questioned himself, it wouldn't feel like that kind of 80s sort of movie patriarch character that we expect. And I just love that there's that combo that happens in there, because again, you could have had a different actor in that role who had chosen to play the part as though he's second guessing himself. But Clue never second guesses himself in this movie. Every decision he makes, that's what we're doing. Give me that bone saw. I'm gonna make the categorically worst decision in human history.
Well, the idea that Leslie Nielsen, I think, was the first pick, and Clu Gulager just nails it. I love the fact that Clu wasn't really known as a comic actor, and the fact that he just made this part his own.
He's very believable in the role, which I think everyone, like all the cast, really nails in this. Is they don't seem like they're acting; they just seem like they are the characters that they are, and I think it's particularly noticeable with him.
Yeah, I would say that everybody feels believable and heightened. It's that kind of Jack Lemmon thing where you're like, yeah, they just operate at that level. It's a higher vibration than anybody else we know, but it absolutely feels authentic. I want to talk about the music really quick, because that was a huge part of it. Aaron mentioned it in his intro. Let's talk about how this soundtrack kind of goes a little different.
Easily one of the greatest film soundtracks of all time. I will not have an argument on it. It's amazing. It fits so perfectly. All of it hits. And I have a funny story. So for 20 years, I was a radio DJ in Rochester, and I did a show called The Local Show. So one night I'm interviewing this band, older guys, right? And I have a Return of the Living Dead hoodie. And one of them goes, "Oh, we have a song on that soundtrack." I was like, "No, what?" They were known as New Math at the time, formerly Jet Blackberries. And I was like, this is embarrassing. I did not do my research before you walked in here.
I think the music's great in the movie. I know the majority of the conversation is going to be about the punk bands, but I want to call out the trioxin theme. I've loved that my whole life. I've got that stuck in my head at least once a week. I want to give that a shout out. It doesn't get enough love.
Well, that's Matt Clifford, and Matt Clifford was not, he did not go on to have a career as a film composer, but he had a long-standing relationship with music, particularly with the Rolling Stones. He's like their touring, I think, keyboardist or something.
Really?
But yeah. Matt Clifford's no joke.
I mentioned earlier that I would go home and watch this movie every day, and it occurred to me at some point that part of the reason I was watching, because I was just like doing homework and it was playing in the background, is that I wanted to hear these songs. And so I bought the soundtrack, and it became like, with my friends and I, it has become the defining sound of this era where this group of friends and I became friends. And again, we were in a rural area, and you know how you are when you're a kid, you mimic what other people do. So we had a big boom box that my friend Todd had, and we got dressed up in our version of punk rock clothes, and we went and walked around this no town with fields and stuff, listening to that soundtrack. I'd never bought any punk rock anything before, because the Cramps were on this. The first punk rock album I bought was the Cramps' Bad Music for Bad People, and that just started everything. I mean, like, my life completely changed. I became a punk rocker like overnight, and that was my whole identity. Punk rock and horror movies was my whole life. So I was pretty weird in small town Missouri in 1987. Again, they could have chosen anything, and everybody's already said, and I agree, it fits so well here. But what really, really grabbed me was how well it fit me, and how well everything on this soundtrack just spoke to me, and I still listen to it all the time.
I've been a punk rock fan ever since I first heard such music, so I enjoyed it being there. But, this movie was 20 years old by the time I saw it. So to me, it wasn't particularly revolutionary to have it in the film. But yeah, it does work very well. But also, like Tim said, it was the score actually really made an impression on me.
Kristy, you mentioned early when we were talking about kind of the lower budget quality of the movie that the effects are by no means low budget. Like they're not skimping at all. And I do want to kind of highlight just how great the special effects are in this movie.
I find the effects traverse the, oh my God, that's amazing. That, oh my God, my mind is blown. The two in particular are Tarman and the Gurney zombie, the half zombie. Tarman petrified me as a child. That first moment when he comes out of the shadows and you see, you know, just the flesh, the bones slipping. And obviously, even though, I mean, the gore is what half makes it, the second half is Alan Troutman's performance, and it is a performance. This is not just a dude in effects. You know, he was trained in ballet. He was and is a Muppeteer as well. And he just makes it. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I get so excited talking about Tarman. And again, it's funny when you meet Alan, the gentlest, sweetest guy in the universe. You could not even imagine him eating brains at all. And then Gurney Zombie. I mean, that whole effect, Tony Gardner, man. I mean, he's gone on to do a lot of amazing things, but so believable and so good. It doesn't feel fake at all. I do like Trash's appliance at the end too. Her, you know, her open mouth, I think is really interesting. Some of the zombies, especially in like outside the mortuary, some of that falls a little flat. Doesn't mean it's not creepy, but I mean, and you've got to understand how, you know, how many people were there. Do you really have time? It's like with Day of the Dead, right? Do we really have time to dress all of these perfectly? No. Does it lessen the experience? I don't think so. But yeah, some of the stuff you look at and you're like, okay, it's a little awkward, but I'm into it. It's fine. But you know, obviously I think the stars of the show are Tarman and Half Zombie for sure.
Tarman is what scared the shit out of me as a kid. Honestly, I didn't think there was a real person in that when I was young. I thought that was also animatronic, but it still scared the shit out of me. So that was pretty crazy to learn recently. I didn't know that that's a real person in there. Yeah, I also like the paramedic zombie a lot. I feel like he's got a good look, good dead look.
I'd have to say my favorite is when the split dog comes back to life.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so the split dogs I think are outstanding, and I think that Tarman, obviously, I've got a spot. I've got Uncle Creepy tattooed on one calf, and the other calf is going to be Tarman from William Stout's original drawing that he made. And you know, Kristy, when you said Trash's appliance, I didn't think you were talking about the one on her face. I thought we were talking about the southern version. The melting zombie, I think at the beginning is a really, which becomes Tarman, but looks very different as we begin, I think is a really important makeup or effect as well. And I'll say the paramedic zombie, if we're talking about the one with the like kind of little bit of mustache and goatee. Yeah. So he's later an actor in this movie that I love from about that same era, Dr. Caligari. He plays a much bigger role, that actor whose name
is that him? Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. And he plays the sort of serial killer, the sexual serial killer from Dr. Caligari who gets his brain stuck in the sexually frustrated wife later in the movie. There's so much here, you know, that I think is so fun. But the split dogs were a thing. The first time I saw that, it's such an easy effect. It doesn't really take much, I don't think, but it really sells you early on what this universe has given you, you know, and it's such an effective little piece of makeup business.
15 years ago, Fright Rags, when I worked with them, did a piece with William Stout. He drew an original Tarman, did a limited poster and a shirt. Check eBay if you don't have it. It's beautiful what he did. I meant to bring this up, but a lot of the zombies he based on the mummies of Guanajuato in Mexico. There's like these naturally mummified bodies essentially in this one municipal cemetery. That's what he did model a lot of the look after, and I found that really interesting.
The mummies she's referring to, I believe, are the same ones that they show at the beginning of Faces of Death. If anybody does, if you don't know what you're talking about, Faces of Death, just run right out and watch Faces of Death. Who knew somebody was going to say that on this show, huh?
Actually, don't run out.
That's your local Walmart.
We did talk a little bit about William Stout because he's really kind of a key player here. We think of our makeup as being the star, but really a lot of that did fall to William Stout's designs.
So William Stout, I think, is an interesting choice because beforehand he wasn't known as a production designer, right? He was known as an artist primarily, and comes on and does what I think is some of the most memorable production design in horror history, and Tarman being a key component of that. And I was lucky enough to get to meet William Stout in a weird sort of way where I wandered around a corner at a non-horror convention and he was sitting in the artist alley and proceeded to regale me with stories about everything Return of the Living Dead. And one of the best parts of that was whenever I didn't know the story about the appliance that Linnea had to wear during the dance sequence until he was like, "Oh, did you know this?" and proceeded to let me have that one. And I was like, wow. And the best part of that is I had a non-horror friend with me. I used to be involved with this organization that did like disaster preparedness through the sort of the viewpoint of zombie apocalypse. And so my friend Kevin was with me, and he's like, "Man, you horror people are different."
Obviously, Tarman's iconic, and I find it very amazing and interesting what he's gone on to do. Two things in particular: creature design for The Mist and the concept art for Pan's Labyrinth. I mean, makes sense. Guillermo del Toro being a huge horror kid, it completely makes sense. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, he's worked on such a vast body of work, but those two things I love that he was a part of.
We have all this awesomeness around Return of the Living Dead, and then Aaron told me, exactly. Aaron told me off camera that he has a deep, abiding hatred for part 2. I hadn't seen it in quite a while, and so in revisiting for the show, I went. It starts off, and you go, "Oh, okay, it's different, but it's okay," and then it becomes increasingly not okay because it becomes such a strained horror comedy that it's leaning really, really heavily into trying to be funny, but it feels very, very forced. It feels like farce, no shade on community theater, but by folks who don't necessarily know how to do farce in a palatable way. They just think, get frantic, get loud. And that's kind of what we get here. And it's funny that even James Karen, who's such a professional, still kind of falls into that trap here as well.
I didn't see this one till I was in my 20s, and I hated it. I could see if I had seen it as a kid, me liking it. It definitely seems to be more aimed towards a younger audience. I think the special effects in it are awesome. You got a young Bobby Briggs in there. Those are the extent of my highlights for it.
It's not great, but I do like the bit of the guys being grave robbers. I think that's kind of a clever thing to put in a zombie movie. And then also I was relieved because at first it seems like the young kid is going to be the main character, and I hate most movies that have kids as main characters.
Yeah.
So I was relieved when, as it goes on, it's kind of his older sister and her friends who are more of the focus.
Aaron,
you've got a movie where, for whatever weird reason, they decide to bring back the same actors who we've already seen in the first film, put them in kind of a similar role, but without any pathos attached to it, just bumbling idiot roles. They take out everything. So for me, a big chunk of it was the sort of anti-authoritarian stance that the first film took, and the second one just becomes, it was just a mess. I've seen it twice in my life. Like, the first time I saw it, I mean, you can imagine from what I've said how important the first movie was to me. And of course, I find out there's a second one coming out, 2 years after I've seen the first one. I am elated. I am so excited. When this came out in 1988, I was at a point in my life where I was going to give anything the benefit of the doubt. And I knew immediately that I hated this thing. And I watched it one more time 20 years ago because I always believe in coming back around. And I was like, 17-year-old me was 100% right.
So I feel like the way Aaron felt about this is how I felt about Spider-Man 3. Because like Sam Raimi's my hero, but I walked out crying because I hated it so much. But no, I kind of look at this as Abbott and Costello meet the zombies, because it's like, let's just put these characters in this film instead. Return of the Living Dead 2 feels like a caricature of Return of the Living Dead for me. And I love Tom Matthews to no end, but ugh, that is a slog to get through for me. The effects do fall flat. Like when I look at Tarman, I'm not really scared by him in this movie, even though that's still Alan Troutman under there. The effects, I don't like. It feels like everything is an animatronic. Nothing feels really real to me, and I think that's what I hate about it.
As I was watching part 2 this most recent time, I kept having moments of, well, that's pretty cool, and that's okay, and that's all right. Like, I just don't think it holds together as a movie, but there are definitely moments that I think do hold up. Ken Wiederhorn, who's our writer-director here, he kind of fell into horror films. It was not, a passion for him. He ended up, he did Shockwaves back in '76, did Eyes of a Stranger. I think he just wanted to make a different movie, and I think that is what he was going for. He wanted to do something that wasn't Dan O'Bannon's vision, and Dan O'Bannon was doing something that wasn't George Romero's vision. But what Ken Wiederhorn ends up with is a wacky zombie movie, and it feels like everybody's pushing really, really hard. We're almost back on track, and then we would get derailed again. I'm always rooting for a movie. I don't hate watch much of anything. But this was one I was just like, you can't quite keep the train on the tracks. That ends up making for a long sit.
Something I was going to add about the effects. So the dude who did it, Kenny Meyer, was involved in Return of the Living Dead. He was an artist on that. And at different times in his career, he worked for Steve Johnson, he worked for K&B. But this one, unless I'm mistaken, was his show. It was his monkey farm. So I don't know if I'm wrong on that. So I guess I blame him for what I don't like about it.
I did find out Ken Wiederhorn, like you kind of going back to how he fell into horror, he felt like he was pigeonholed. So he wanted to go more into comedy. He wrote this more as a comedy. He didn't write it to be a sequel to Return of the Living Dead. Tom Fox, I think, the producer of the first, was interested in a sequel, got his script, said he'd be interested in producing it if they could make it a sequel. It was him that wanted James Karen and Tom Matthews back. It became one of those later Hellraiser movies where they're just cutting and pasting stuff that they want from a different script. So, and you can feel it, but you can also feel that, yeah, he wasn't trying to make this a horror movie at all. That electricity special effect at the end, they said cost $50,000 and was the most expensive special effect. And he said he doesn't know if it was worth it.
I mean,
it's the end of the movie.
Yep. Let's press ahead to Return of the Living Dead 3, which I think, Aaron, you have a little more affinity for.
Yeah, I mean, almost anything that Brian Yuzna does is worth something. He's such a dichotomy to me because he's such a, I got to edit a film last year, a documentary film, and he was a big part of it. So I got a 45-minute interview with him with a lot of outtakes. And I've never spoken to him, but he strikes me as being exactly what I thought he would be like, which is like a very normal guy. And everything he touches is anything but. Everything he touches is super surreal and hyper weird and body horror to the extreme. And so I don't think this is a great film, but I enjoy what it tries to do a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't get around to this one till way later in my movie watching career. I wasn't familiar with Brian Yuzna yet. Since then, I've become a huge fan, but I hadn't seen this one. I don't think since in between that time. So watching it for this was pretty awesome. I got the Vestron video Blu-ray, so seeing that uncut on there I was like, man, this is a fucking Brian Yuzna movie. I forgot about all the other zombie stuff that's in there besides the main actress. And then there's a lot of it. There's a lot of that Reanimator feeling, especially towards the end there where everything's just going to shit. I'm kind of newer to this one, but I liked it a lot.
Yeah, and I think it does take a different tack than the previous two films. It focuses on a specific zombie, somebody who has died and has been revived through the trioxin. And that's Melinda Clarke, aka Mindy Clark. She does a great job. It's a really great performance. And I like that it delves deeper into the mythology of being a zombie. Having to inflict pain upon herself helps the hunger for the brains go away. And I think that's an intelligent way to kind of further the mythology. It also allows us to have that using a touch where we have the kind of body modification aspects being brought in, where it becomes very creepy alt culture, etc. Oh, maybe those around us who are doing the bod mod, they're also trying to deal with some pain inside.
This definitely feels like a Brian Usna film. So obviously, he produced Reanimator and From Beyond, and he had a solid few years there. He directed Society in '89, wrote and directed Bride of Reanimator in I think '91, and then this was like what, '93 he did this one.
Yep.
I know this is going to sound like a really far reach. When everybody thinks of body horror, they think Cronenberg. Yes, I think Cronenberg. I think Brian Usna sometimes, to be quite honest with you, especially with Society. I don't want to say it feels out of place, because guess what? 4 and 5 feel way out of place, but it does feel like a different thing. But I mean, maybe that's the beauty of this series. Every single one feels different, and the first one is the best.
I thought it was really interesting how, this one is basically a love story, and kind of, hinges on the classic literature thing of a guy makes one terrible decision for love, and then everything goes to hell. So, a fun approach. And, it's, for a zombie movie, it's pretty light on hordes of rampaging zombies. So, I thought that was actually kind of cool to do something different in that way. And then also Riverman was great.
Poor Riverman.
We have the son of the Army colonel who is working on the revised Trioxin project, where they're trying to create our super soldiers, is rebelling. She's also rebelling. And so they're going to get away together. And, there's a car accident and she ends up being revived because they sneak into the Trioxin experiment and they witness somebody being resurrected. And that's where he gets the idea that I can resurrect my dead girlfriend. Not a great idea, turns out. But I love the fact that we really do explore characters in this one in a way that we don't in the other two. Like, we don't get deep backstory and relationships with our characters in Return of the Living Dead 1 and 2. Here we do. We really are exploring the relationship between the father and the son, the relationship between the two lovers, the relationship with Riverman, who's the one who kind of takes them in with nothing to gain. It's a purely selfless act. So I think there's a lot of heart. And I think that's what I love about Usna films, is that there is a lot of heart and examining the human condition, but through a really, really weird lens.
This is a movie that I really wish was called something else almost. And I know that the Trioxin and all of the stuff comes from the central mythos, but it still feels like the wrong tone for where the first one is. I like the movie. I don't necessarily like it as a Return of the Living Dead movie.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Usna said he was interested in making a sequel. He didn't like the title. He did want to call it something else. Trimark, who owned Return of the Living Dead at that point, their only stipulations for making it with him is you had to have the Trioxin and you had to have brain eating. He was like, does it have to be a comedy? And they're like, no. So he wanted to do something different, which I respect. But yeah, agree. This could and should have been called something else.
Like, it would have been kind of genius to be like, that movie Return of the Living Dead. That was really not what happened,
Maybe that's what they're going to do in the one they're making now.
The conclusion with Riverman being in the exoskeleton, I find that really troubling. That's where the horror is for me, is watching somebody being turned into something else against their will. And that's kind of what's happening throughout this entire movie.
It seems like definitely something that would be happening, obviously heightened with the zombies and bringing them back to life, but creating any kind of weapon you can, regardless of who it's hurting and that kind of thing. It feels real.
I just think it was very topical at that moment. It's so smart. I can't think of a lot of other sort of big horror films that jumped into that. I mean, that was a moment where, as a society, we were getting used to the idea of body modification at the mainstream level for the first time. So it was like, This is a cool thing to do. Not really her, but what her character does, I think, was really interesting.
I don't really have anything to add, but I do just want to show off my DVD signed by Brian Usna saying "Love Kills." And then I was in Spain last year, and I found this in a used bookshop. It's just like zombie reviews, a Spanish book, but
Nice.
on the cover.
For a certain generation, Mindy Clark made a pretty big impression on folks in the same way that Linnea Quigley did.
I think horror that scares me is man's inhumanity to man. So films like Martyrs, films like The Wicker Man, those are the things that upset me. So I definitely agree in that respect.
One quick additional thing, just a little piece of trivia that I found out for this show, and I didn't know this. Brian Peck he's the only actor in that's in all three of the first three movies.
Yeah, I read that as well. Let's press on to our final lap. 2005's Return of the Living Dead Necropolis and Return of the Living Dead Rave to the Grave, both of which are celebrating their 20th anniversary this year, which is insane to me. I was saying backstage that, when these movies came out in 2005, I think they were kind of like the low water mark of what we knew zombie movies to be. And now I'm kind of like 20 years on, I'm like, they're fine. They completely mess with the mythos. And that's one thing I do, want to take them to task for, is that you've got a perfectly good mythos laid out for you. There's rules. And I like it when people follow rules, even though Dan O'Bannon didn't follow the rules.
Yeah, I hated that you could kill the zombies. That was like the thing.
Just by shooting them, not even in the head, just shooting them. I think they started where you could shoot them in the head. And then it just started where you just shoot them and they fall down. Like, well, what the hell? Are they just people now? What's going on?
Yeah, I hated everything about it when I first saw it. I had a buddy in town a couple days ago, so I watched 4 and 5 with him while I had someone at the house to deal with it with. And
do you still have a buddy?
He's not here anymore, but it's an all right zombie movie. It's a Sci-Fi Channel movie. I don't think they did it on purpose, but they do kind of continue the thread from 3 with the bioweapons.
Yep.
It felt a lot more like they knew that from Resident Evil though than part 3. It is what it is. It's a lot of funny line readings for me this time around, but I found things to be entertained by. I'd recommend a completist one-time watch.
Eric has actually taken some pretty rough rides with me on these franchises. Eric did the Leprechaun franchise with me, and he also did the Sleepaway Camp franchise. So I felt for you as you were sitting down to watch 4 and 5, because we were originally going to get together, but Eric was sick. And so I'm like, oh, dude, you have to watch those alone? I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. Similar to what Tim was saying, I don't really mind them. I mean, I think they're bad as part of this franchise, but if they weren't part of this franchise, they'd be fine. I mean, not great, but entertaining enough way to pass an hour and a half. But one thing they did change the name of the drug to trioxin 5 rather than 2,4,5 trioxin. Right. And so I kind of liked that as a this is kind of the same, but also a bit different.
Well, and I wasn't sure if they were trying to do like a reboot, are we just trying to pretend like that didn't happen, or it's a long ago type of thing? Peter Coyote is slumming it so hard in Necropolis. I'm like, dude, do you even want to be here? I know you want to be here.
Yep.
Trioxin 5, by the way, was my least favorite Motown era.
And then I'm very amused how in Necropolis you have a guy who looks about 30 playing the high school kid. Of course, I mean, that's fairly common in movies, but I just really noticed it in this one. But I guess
he's in college in the next one.
Yeah.
I do appreciate the Full Moon Pictures Charles Band connection in there, right? So Brian Usna, all of that, and then William Butler, who wrote both of them. That's what I find interesting. William Butler wrote both of these sequels, and then the same director whose name I have not learned to pronounce, so I'm not going to say it, that they both did it, and they both came out in 2005. I remember being so excited because I'm a huge Return fan. I was like, oh yeah, man, we got some more sequels. I hated 2 and 3. Let's see what I feel. And then the other day, because every once in a while, when I'm about to do a podcast, I'll rewatch it with my boyfriend. And he was pressing me like, I thought you said we were going to watch 4 and 5. I'm like, I never said we were going to watch 4 and 5. You can watch 5 and let me know what you think. But yeah, not a fan.
Also, the fact that it becomes the same creative team for 4 and 5, but they feel like such different movies. Like they don't even really bother to follow the timeline or the mood or it's like they just felt like, okay, we're going to do one sequel and another sequel, and maybe one of them will be good. They released them at the same time, both on the Sci-Fi Channel. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand the creative process behind that.
Yeah, me neither. I was baffled by that.
I feel like Necropolis was the more straight horror one, and
Right.
Grave to the Grave is more comedy.
Right.
I don't know.
It's like, I heard it was a horror comedy, so we'll make one horror and one comedy.
Yeah.
Because horror comedy is too hard. This is a movie that if it wasn't called Return of the Living Dead, if it was just called Necropolis, I'd be like, yeah, that was fine. That was a decent time waster. The fact that it kind of latches on to Return of the Living Dead, I think, is what earns it some resentment points. I mean, it's like what they did with all the Howling sequels. We're like, it's a werewolf movie. It doesn't have to be a Howling movie.
The marsupial.
Well, that's the only good one. So, but yeah, let's talk about Rave to the Grave, which is the follow-up. I don't know if it's the follow-up or not. It's like
I don't think they're the same characters.
Well, they are the same characters because they refer back to my uncle, and
but I don't think they're the same characters.
They don't seem like they're the same
5 before 4 too, so I was like,
no, they're the same characters. It's supposed to be a year later. It's supposed to be a year later, and you have 3 or 4 characters who they experienced this before, which also makes no sense.
So
that
they're
they would
still living with that uncle, even though they know he's the bad guy.
Well, he ran off at the end of 4, so I don't think they're still living with him. They find out that he died, though.
I have to agree with Tim here, even though it kind of makes it seem like they're the same characters. I don't think they really are. I mean, I don't think anyone was paying that much attention. But
no.
But what I was going to say about Rave to the Grave is it's one of those movies where, like, I'd always seen the cover and thought, well, that looks really cool. And yeah, the cover does look really cool. And it's definitely better than the movie itself. I felt like with 4 and 5, like they had an outline or at least some bullet points and basically made 2 different movies that are kind of the same. And I mean, yeah, 5's supposedly a sequel to 4, but it seems more like diverging timelines to me.
I legitimately only have one thing to say about Rave to the Grave, and then I'll be done. The title, it's awesome. Rave to the Grave, man. I love that.
It's a good title. Goofy movie.
Tarman looks pretty good in it, though. A lot better than part 2.
There's so many things that just feel lazy about these 2 sequels. You're like, okay, are you even trying? It's clear that like Return of the Living Dead is part of the DNA. Like you're working from that blueprint, but why are you ignoring everything so hard? And everything feels a little perfunctory. I think that's enough of that. We've done all the Return of the Living Deads, and we're circling back around for final thoughts on the original 1985 Return of the Living Dead, celebrating its 40th anniversary. Eric, kick us off.
Yeah, I would say if you are a horror fan, you should definitely see this movie. If you're not a horror fan but are horror intrigued, I think it's a good starting point.
Kristy.
There is a 6th one that's going to be coming out set at Christmas time. And I'm a stickler for exactness. And they said it takes place 18 months after the original. I did the math. It's 17 months and 3 weeks. So let's just not go there. Anyway, there's so many things I could say about this film. Brilliantly written, brilliantly acted, beautiful mix of horror and comedy. The music, phenomenal. My standout, of course, will always be Tarman. I mean, again, those things that you see as a kid, it can really affect you for life. And big vacant eyeballs are my number one monster thing that just scare the life out of me. But I find 1985 to be one of my favorite years for horror, specifically Return, Day, and Reanimator. Those 3 right there.
Aaron.
I'll just reiterate what I said before. This film is a masterclass in tone because, again, it is a film that it says that it hurts to be dead. It's agonizingly painful, that there is something inherent inside of each one of us that, if activated, would make us consume the people we love the most. Consciously, we would know it, that the people in charge will always make the wrong decision, and that the apocalypse could happen very, very easily if the entitled people of the world just decide to turn a key. And yet you walk out of the film feeling like, God damn, I just had a good time. And it's such an interesting experiment in the relationship between the tone of the film and the sort of the plot of the film. And tone wins in this film. And I think tone wins in every film. And it's the thing we talk about least in film. And this film makes it obvious. So if you haven't seen it, it's the best time you'll have. Being both horrified and having a good time, and being scared and being grossed out. We didn't talk about the brain eating, which I think also is some great makeup. So if you haven't seen Return of the Living Dead, rush right out and see it. And maybe like me, you'll come up for air 200 times down the road.
And Tim.
Yeah, I barely remember a time in my life like before Return of the Living Dead. I've seen it countless times. And then even just reviewing for this, I found myself able to watch it over and over again, and I really didn't care to put anything else on. It's just endlessly entertaining. I just love being in that world. That's all. Please watch it if you haven't.
And if you haven't watched it, how'd you get all the way to the end of this podcast?
Yeah.
You have my appreciation. Something that you just said, Aaron, like the movie ends basically with the apocalypse. And then during the credits, we have that skull, dropping open, going, "Do you want a party?" And then we get clips from funny moments throughout the movie. And I think that's part of the vibe. Like Dan O'Bannon recognizes, like, yeah, I just gave you a super bummer of an ending, and I hope you had a good time. And I think that's what he's all about in this movie. And I think he reminds you of the good time you had en route to the apocalypse. Yeah, it hurts to be dead. As we see, there's that moment where it hurts, and then it's something else. I think there's some fun stuff to be explored below the surface. And thank you all so much. This has been a super fun conversation. I really had a great time going back and watching these movies, even the ones that I didn't love. So until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.